So on the show today, John Williams. So John is the author of what was called Screw Work, Let's Play, and now it's been upgraded to Fuck Work, Let's Play. And he's, someone that I respect a lot in the area of life purpose. And he was a senior consultant at Deloitte, I believe. Then at a certain point, just went enough already. He does some really good online work. He's someone that's been around for a while in this field of personal growth and knows what he's talking about. So, John, nice to see you again, mate.
Yeah, nice to see you. And thanks very much for inviting me on.
I'm in Mexico today, so hopefully the Airbnb quality will hold up. And you'll see me taking notes on my phone as ever. Where are you in the world, John?
I'm not far from Shoreditch. I live overlooking the canal, which is quite nice. And
in London.
Hipster London. Yeah.
Yes, Shoreditch, the home of the Shoreditch wanker for listeners who don't know the area of good coffee and bad attitudes. So I quite like Shoreditch, actually.
Yeah, I like the good coffee,
It is good coffee there. Listen, John, let's start with your story then for people that may not have come across you before. Like what led you into this world of sort of life purpose and the personal growth stuff you do now?
Well, I reckon I was probably what Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, called a shadow artist. So I love technology. That was a genuine passion. But I went into technology for creative industries. So I worked on special effects software that Disney used. I worked on automation systems that the BBC used and people like that as a programmer. So I actually coded and then did that for 10 years and then got into video on the internet and ended up at Deloitte, which I found did not suit me at all. But really, I was passionate about psychology and, broadly you call it psychological healing. I had a fairly unhappy time as a child due to my father died in a car accident and some other shit happened. And so I'd always been devouring psychology books since I was 13 years old. And now I've basically been in therapy for about 25 years. I did some of the core training that psychotherapists do. I did a counseling training year. And I've done all sorts of body work treatments, as a client. I've experienced all sorts of things. And then when I started, really indulging my creativity, I started running events. I ran a live event for what's called scanners. A scanner is somebody with lots of ideas, lots of interests, hates to choose between them. And I ran a live event for 5 years that became very popular and got in the press. That attracted me a book deal for Screw Work, Let's Play, which is about how to do what you love and get paid for it. And I've, for 15 years, we've basically been helping creatively minded people do what they love and get paid for it. So I spent a lot of time teaching people marketing. That's what it comes down to.
Well, we share this, don't we? I mean, you're one of the people that when I did Purpose Black Belt, I think 5 years ago, you're one of the people I reached out to and I read your book in its first iteration. And, it became apparent to me that and there's sort of two problems, isn't there, in our communities? Like there's people who don't know what they want to do with their life and they feel sort of dissatisfied working in the 9 to 5. And then there's people who have discovered what they want to do with their life, but they can't sell it for shit.
Yes.
And it seems like we both got interested in those two topics. You were ahead of the game with me on this, and your book's now the sort of W.H. Smith's recommended book or something at the moment, right?
Yeah,
this is the second edition somewhere.
It's hilarious because there are much bigger problems when there's a global pandemic going on. But I got this great news that it's W.H. Smith Business Book of the Month, a massive promotion in every store, and then they instantly made it illegal to go into any of those stores. So, that's
damn it! It's a nice thing to be able to say, though. And I mean, why do you think people are so interested in this area of I mean, it's kind of like stating the obvious to me, but I think it's worth laying out the reasons because there's a number of reasons. Why do people want to do what they love and get paid for it?
I think it's a search for meaning. So in actual fact, I was on a friend's podcast and described me as, a philosopher or something, because although my books are about business and they're quite practical about how to market yourself, actually the great challenge of doing what you love and get paid for it is find that sweet spot between what you love doing and what the world needs. Yeah. And in actual fact, the pivotal quote in this book is by Aristotle. And he said something like, and can't remember it without looking it up, something like, where your great joy and the world's needs meet, there lies your vocation. And I thought, well, there you go, 2,300 years old. that piece of advice, and it's still shit hot, really. And that finding that sweet spot between the two is kind of a lifelong journey, right? You're always modifying your business. I'm always modifying my business.
Constantly. Yeah.
Like, how do you make this even more enjoyable? How do you have a bigger impact? Sometimes, how do you make more money? Because I like money and I don't mind admitting that.
Yeah.
How do you get all those things together?
I think it's the sort of Venn diagram. Sometimes the Akagi, it's called, or whatever, pretentious names. And as you say, it really goes back, quotes like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Mm-hmm. And the idea that it's just too much of a chunk of the day to write off.
Yeah.
And I was always incredibly intolerant of doing work I didn't enjoy. And I think some people are more tolerant than me, but sort of eventually it gets to them, doesn't it? In sort of a meaning crisis, a health crisis, a frustration, a boredom, it gets to them somehow in the end. And then they go, okay, what do I love? And then maybe we could add a third one. What am I good at? And then what is the world needing? Which sometimes is, people also add, what can you make money from? But my sense is, well, if the world needs it, someone will pay, So there seems to be the key pieces there.
Yeah, that's right. I talk about the 3 Ps, which are basically exactly that. Play. Practice means you've got some experience, because what sometimes happens, particularly with those of us who like to do the blue sky thinking, is, we come up with something which this would be so cool to do, but you don't have any track record. And if you're going to pursue a business, you need to bring something to it other than just the idea, because ideas themselves are not actually very valuable. Mm-hmm. Despite the name of my company, the Ideas Lab. I love ideas, but you need to bring some expertise so you can create value around it. And then the third thing, as you say, is, I call it profit, which is a combination of there's need and there is some kind of business model that works. Like, if you want to make money from a blog directly, you want to get paid for every blog post that's read, doesn't really work, right? That business model has gone out the window. It never existed. Well, except Medium, I guess, is kind of introducing that. But there are ways of making money, which means you write great content and then it draws people's attention to other things that you get paid for. So there is a little bit of that, like, how exactly do I configure this so that it actually does make me money while I'm doing the things I enjoy?
Yeah. And for me, it's often a sort of tweaking. It's a sort of like, okay, what's the thing in embodiment I'm most interested in? I think a lot of the listeners of this show are kind of in 2 categories. They're either they've got an embodiment as a hobby, and they're kind of, maybe happy to have it as a hobby, like the Aikido teacher who just does 3 classes a week and they have a day job. And I know lots of Aikido teachers that are happy that way. And then, there's another group of people that kind of, she's probably 3 groups of people. Another group of people who kind of go, okay, I'm doing what I love for a living, but kind of how do I make a bit more money from it? And then there's another group of people who are like, you know what, I've been doing something that's related to what I love, but maybe there's a bit of fine tuning. So maybe we could speak to sort of tips for those 3 audiences, like, because they're 3 different parts of the journey, right? So it's like the one who's kind of like, I don't think many listeners would be in the completely lost category. I meet sort of 25-year-olds. I have no idea what I want to do in my life. I'm like, go traveling, work in bars, work in ski resorts, get drunk, have lots of girlfriends, just enjoy your life and then find out later.
Yeah, and my answer for the people who say, first of all, can we rule out the passion thing? So people say, I haven't found my passion, and I'm a bit skeptical about that. I don't have a single passion. I've got loads of things I'm really excited about. Drumming on my electronic drum kit that I bought during lockdown is one of them, but I'm not going to attempt to get paid for it. So you can have lots of different interests and you can indulge all of them, and some of them will pay and some of them don't. And if you feel if anyone who's been sitting waiting to start a business because they don't have an idea, and if that's lasted for more than 3 months, something else is going on. It's bullshit. What's going on is you're not willing to fail, you're not willing to experiment.
That's the blocks part, right? This is where embodiment comes in. People have these perfectionism, don't want to fail, don't want to be seen, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also there's partly another thing, which is misinformation, which is that people think that starting a business involves quitting your job, selling your house and banking everything. And, the failure would be enormous if you lose your house and everything, and everyone, can see you fail very publicly. But instead of that, I talk in the book about play projects. Do for 30 days, say, I'm going to do something and I'm going to produce a tangible result from it. I'm not just going to Google stuff. I'm going to, get my first client, for instance, if you're doing embodiment work, or I'm going to I'm going to do a video every day talking about this thing I'm so passionate about and see if I can engage people. And then at the end of 30 days, you might go like, I hate this, I'm not going to do it anymore, but it's given me an idea for something else. And that's much better than doing nothing. So that's what I recommend for the first group that's really
so start, do something, gain experience. And even if you go, well, this is sort of, I kind of like it. Well, what's the part you like and what's the part you don't? It takes you closer, right? There's an experimental process here.
It's like that graph, which you might see, there's a meme where people go, this is what people think success, this is how they think success works. Here's A, here's B, straight line. Here's how success really works. Here's A, B, here's A and B. And then there's just this massive squiggly mess in between.
Yeah,
and
that's
the reality. Apparently that was the stand-up comic, Dimitri Martin, that came up with that. And it's so true. And we're not taught that in school, because we're taught to go in a very linear way and like pass the exam or fail the exam. And if you fail, that's it. Whereas in entrepreneurship, there's no final failure. You can always get up and adjust and go again.
It is a very different model. So at school, there's this sort of model of like, okay, you want to become a dentist, you need to get these A levels, then you go to university and you study for 4 years and then you're a dentist. And it's very linear, but there's very few jobs like that. Other, dentist, nurse, there's a few jobs like that, but very few. And these days, increasingly, it seems like the sort of, particularly in the sort of current climate of chaos and adaptation, that you do need to try different things, and it's iterative. And the conference came out of a live conference that never happened, and then we did some purpose workshops, and that turned into an online course, and then that got repurposed 3 years later. And it's all things that I enjoy, but there's a sort of listening to the market, listening to my own embodied self and my own calling. And as you say, it's not just passion as well. Like people say I'm passionate about this, and what they mean is I enjoy it a lot.
Yes.
But I enjoy eating chocolate a lot. No one's going to pay me for that, right? So it has to have the service piece in there too. I think it's easy to mistake enjoyment for sort of the deep cooling of service. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote about this in a second book I did. And it's the distinguishing thing is value. So that's got a sort of 5-layer model, that book. And there's the things you enjoy doing, which is cool. And then there's the second layer, which is for things you're good at. And then you have to use the things you enjoy doing and the things you're good at to create value for people. Like, as you say, I like watching The Simpsons or Rick and Morty, but it doesn't create value for other people. So no one's going to pay me for it. Yeah. Now, if I write the world's greatest Rick and Morty blog, or create a t-shirt range, or whatever it might be, or use the sort of sense of humor that's in Rick and Morty, the animated series, as part of my brand, it inspires me to be more shocking or whatever, then I can maybe create value for people.
Yeah.
So that's the key thing.
Value creation rather than just simply I enjoy it.
The link between value creation and getting and reward is kind of hidden in a job. Like if you do a really good job today in the office, you don't automatically get paid more for that day's work. So that the link between value creation and money is kind of somewhat disconnected in jobs, which is why we don't understand it, and it's not taught at school either.
It is amazing what isn't taught at school. So many of the podcasts we have on is someone basically who's found a job teaching something that wasn't taught at school, right? Because I have educators of various kinds on. Okay, what about the other parts of the journey then? So there's the guy who's completely lost, not so many of them. There's the guy who's like, what, do I do this for a living? Maybe I'll do a little experiment. I'll see, I don't have to give up everything at once. There's that partial transition. And then, what about the person that's like doing something? Maybe they're a yoga teacher, but it's stopped feeling as satisfying as it once was. That's something I've come across.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, this doesn't require some contact with your body to explore why it's lost some of its meaning. And there isn't always a magic answer that comes up straight away, but maybe you need to take yourself away from the work for a while and explore what it could be. And, I've had this experience recently where I was running a 5-day challenge with up to 1,000 people every 6 weeks. And I was finding that schedule really punishing. And then a mentor of mine said, well, just run them 4 times a year instead of 8 times a year, and then do whatever you want. Like replace half the 5-day challenges with just random shit you enjoy, but which is still the promotion and will bring in money for the company. And immediately I could feel like, oh yeah, that feels lighter. It feels better. So it's worth talking it through with a lot of people, exploring what it could be. Maybe doing a little experiment, saying maybe if something's drawing you to do something different, you could experiment on that as a one-off. I ran a course 2 years ago on dating and relationships, and I'm really quite bad at dating. So I seem to be okay once I get into a relationship, but really bad at getting into them. And so I brought in all these experts to teach me, and we broadcasted live on the Psychology's page, which has over 1 million followers, and then compiled all this stuff into a course, and we ran it as a live online course and then sold it as a passive course. And I just did that as a kind of one-off, as an experiment, but it was fun and it moved me forward and it raised my profile. So sometimes you just need to kind of do something a bit random like that.
Yeah, I like experiments. I like fun things. I like things that I'm going to learn from. And some of them turn into nothing, but it's like, hey, I did it. It's no big deal. You know, I did a thing on Christianity and embodiment like last year, and it never really turned into anything, but it was okay. And I learned some stuff, and I met a couple of new people I wouldn't have met. And I was like, okay, great. And then there's other things that turn into huge, big businesses I'm not expecting. You know, the first conference we did just sort of for fun. Like, it was just like a random idea. And then it ended up being my biggest money earner 2 years ago. I was like, what the hell? How did that happen? You know, and it really just came from like, hey, I want to do this. Let's give it a go. And, you know, we can do this with the resources we have without threatening the core business, you know, which is like my coach training and stuff. So it was, yeah. What do you think people sort of misunderstand about purpose and finding purpose? Like, is there any sort of things that you just hit again and again and again coaching people?
I think partly they're looking for this magic answer that's going to fall out of us. You know, I used to run careers workshops really early on in my career, and people were secretly hoping I would say to them, like, you should be a fireman. And they'd just go, oh, of course.
Yeah.
And then they could run away and be delighted. So I think that the idea that you're, I read a book that used the phrase, big life decisions are more commonly built brick by brick, like you're laying out a path in front of you. And I think that's a much better way to think about them.
Rather than the lightning bolt.
Yeah.
Oh, I went on a course with Mark or John, and now I get it. Now that I've got the one thing. And you can sort of, people set themselves up for disappointment. You know, I've tried a lot of things, and I'm going to try you, and it probably won't work. You know, and it's like, yeah, but there's this sort of hard job of trying things and doing things and getting out there and experimenting and failing and then failing again. Like, the people don't really want to do that sometimes.
And I think also the problem is with people like me writing books to say, do what you love and get paid for it. As I do say inside the book, you're not going to enjoy every moment. Right. So it's actually, if you look at the word play, we've really misunderstood it, because play has lots of different meanings. And in fact, the book kind of explores all of them. But well, if you look at children playing, they don't always have a smile on their face. Sometimes they're really concentrating intensely, trying to crack something. Sometimes they're playing a role and they're really kind of getting into it. And they're doing something again and again until they've learned it. But play is never the same from day to day. It always evolves, because once you crack something, you want to move on. And so there's another part of play, which is being in play, and meaning that you're willing to be flexible. You don't have you're not looking for that straight line A to B thing. You know, it'll be an organic path that you follow. And I think that that's a really important thing to understand as well.
I like that. Okay, so let's get down to some of the nuts and bolts here then. So, you know, someone maybe has found something they love, they're experimenting, they're, you know, I call it the somatic radar, they're listening to what makes them come alive, they're listening to feedback from the audience, they're listening to financial feedback. And it's like, okay, they're doing okay, but they're sort of, you know, maybe they're just find themselves keeping their prices low, or, you know, like, let's get into some of the nuts and bolts that's going to help the kind of yoga teacher or dance teacher listening to this.
Well, I think sometimes one of the clever things you can do, there's quite a few things, but one of them is to think about how you can create something that's unique to you. So how can you create something that is but is your methodology. And the example, I think, one really good example is a guy called Mark Shaw, and he was an Alexander technique teacher, but he got really interested in swimming and teaching people how to swim. And what he realized is that most people, when they're swimming, are doing something very bad in AT terms, which is that they're putting their head back, which throws your entire body out of whack, makes everything a struggle, and it feels like a struggle. And so what he wanted to do is to teach people to put their face in the water and actually be flat and be able to swim almost effortlessly. And it's not really for people who are competing and trying to, be an Olympic swimmer. It's for the rest of us who want to enjoy swimming. And so what he created was the Shaw method, but it was basically Mark teaching Alexander technique in the water. But because he didn't call it Alexander technique swimming lessons, he's the only person that does the Shaw method.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's another swimming method called total immersion, which is somewhat related, but is a bit more kind of competitive. So you can, whatever you're doing, if you can create something unique, that really helps. And that's, I run a program called the Pioneer Program. It helps people do that, because the idea is if you can niche down to make something so specific, there's only one of you in that category. It's called by some people category creation. You're immediately number one in that category.
And you don't have to compete on price, because it's like you're the person that, and it's not just about the naming. I mean, there's a million people that have named somatic methodologies that are almost identical. I really find that crass, actually. It's the actually doing something that's a different, and it could be like a different technique, but you don't have to invent like a new yoga style or a new martial arts style. It can be a different flavor of doing it, right? Like, it's kind of like a different kind of way of doing something as much as anything that
and in fact all of us have our own individual style anyway. One of my clients on my Pioneer Program creates something called Yoga for Anxiety, and I thought, like, there's a simple brand right there. And if I used to have a lot of anxiety, and back then if I was looking for a yoga person, she'd be on my short list to check out immediately.
Well, that's the thing, right? Tad Hargrave's very good on niching, and on his website there's a list of 200 different yoga niches. And so it's death metal yoga, and some of them sound a bit silly, like goat yoga and stuff like that, but a lot of them, like my student Masha does one, yoga for sleep. So if you're interested in yoga and you can't sleep, you're going to pick her class over Bob's standard yoga, because you go, I can't sleep, I want to do a yoga class. Great, that's where I'm going. No, I don't mind paying an extra $5 for it, because it's exactly what I want.
Yeah, I remember somebody saying to me at a networking event, said, I think she did Alexander technique. And she said, look, no one will pay over £50 an hour for Alexander technique. And I said, well, I went to see somebody last week and I paid 75. And she goes, really? And we become so convinced that there's no way you could do it. And the reason I went with that guy is because I was currently training in something to do with formative psychology, which is like Stanley Kellerman, if you know his work. And he's not very well known. And this guy had actually worked with Kellerman. And so he was combining Kellerman's work with Alexander technique. And I thought that was really interesting. So, you can always find something special. And also, I think if you can brand it to something specific, then often a lot of practitioners have more than one thing that they've trained in anyway, right? So you end up mixing things. So Kate, who created Yoga for Anxiety, she'd done lots of trainings around neuroscience, and she really knew her stuff, and she'd experienced anxiety herself very badly and got over it, and yoga being part of that. So she was combining yoga and neuroscience and a whole bunch of CBT and things like that to make something that is a unique cocktail. It's not quite like anybody else's. And I think anybody can do that. Kind of, I was going to draw a parallel with espresso martinis, but I don't know if it's particularly relevant. But no one espresso martini is exactly like anybody else's espresso martini. And so if you can just put a kind of brand on your particular flavor, then it also combines not just, a clever name and a couple of functions, but it includes your personality.
Yes.
And you may or may not click with each person's individual personality. So the thing they're naming is then partly what makes it different actually is I know I'm getting Mark or John or Sarah or whoever it might be.
Yeah, I've definitely done that with embodiment. There's lots of good embodiment teachers out there, but I have my particular flavor, and some people hate it, but some people love it. And it's refreshing to the ones that are want that, the jokes and the directness. And then there's others who really don't want that. And that's okay, right? There's plenty of other teachers with different styles. And if anything, I think I've made a good living because I have a style which is less common in the embodiment world.
Yeah.
Rather than bending myself out of shape and trying to pretend I'm a kind of softly spoken Californian.
That's a really important point. And in order to turn people on, you've got to be willing to turn the majority off. So you want to be, I was just recording a video about this earlier for my 5-day challenge. But what we typically do when we start out is we say we can do anything for anyone. So this is another thing that's worth covering. And we say, we can help anybody with anything. And also we tend to strip out our personality from all our marketing, which is a terrible thing to do. So now what you've done is commoditized yourself because you look exactly like everybody else who's got your label, who's a yoga teacher or a therapist or whatever it might be. And you're doing a disservice to the client. The example I use is I had a couple of friends who, when I was on this training course in psychotherapy, they were on the training track to actually become therapists, which I didn't do. And they were really different personalities. One was older, have this kind of, warm motherly vibe, and she was a mum. And the other person was younger, kind of sassy, a bit politically incorrect, funny. But you look at the website they put up at first, it was you couldn't spot the difference, particularly because they'd been to the same training organization. So they're using the same kind of language. And that's a ridiculous thing to do because if I click with one of them, I'm probably not going to click with the other. They're so different. They're not doing me a favor by hiding their personality or their particular approach. So I want to encourage anybody who's listening to this, you are the ultimate example of this, Mark, but I try to embody it too. How can you be yourself and show your personality? And that includes, might include swearing. It might include feeling really strongly about particular subjects that get people's backs up, whatever it might be.
I mean, that's common advice. When is your advice not, because I've almost gone too far with that, right? And I've had to back off and say, you know what, maybe I don't need to share that political views. Maybe I want to just ease up on that side of my personality, which actually isn't so great. Is there a way people can go too far with that? It becomes unprofessional. It just becomes unhelpful. I mean, do people need to know my peripheral views on everything that isn't embodiment related? Is there a way you can sort of go the opposite direction with that? I mean, it's less common as a problem because people are more, averse. Generally, they're kind of seeking safety and conformity. But I mean, can you go too far the other way?
Yeah, there is a question around that, I think. I don't know. I mean, ultimately, there's 7 billion people in the world. What percentage do you actually need of them to hire you to make a really good living? And the issue is if everybody's kind of finds you vaguely interesting, that is much less powerful than if a small number of people find you, addictive. They want to do everything. They want to become a true fan in Kevin Kelly's terms and buy
talking to my marketing team, they're saying, we're going to get a list of 1 million people by the end of the year. I say, we don't need a list of 1 million people. We need 10,000 people who absolutely love what we do.
Yeah.
And that's way easier to manage. It's way more fun. It's a better tribe than just being, doing sort of just doing scale. So
yeah, I do think it's an interesting point about politics, and I'm fairly similar to you, kind of center left, maybe. I don't know how you describe yourself. And I share a little bit about that, but I don't take a really strong stance on it because I know it's so explosive. But the advantage of being where I am on the political spectrum is that I can understand people who are a bit further to the right and people who are a bit further to the left. And I don't mind if people have a bit of a set to on a post I put up about, what's happening with Brexit or something, where often I'm asking, is this a good deal, for instance, what we've had for Brexit? I generally don't know how to measure that. And there will be a bit of argy-bargy between the commenters, but I don't mind that. And I think that's okay. And, but I agree, there might be a point at which to say, is it relevant to my yoga practice, how I feel about?
And I consider myself pretty much centrist and center left on some things, but conservative on others. But I think it used to be an advantage because you could listen to both sides, you understand both points of view. these days it almost seems a disadvantage because it's like everything's so polarized that being in the middle just means everyone hates you, you know?
Well,
or it's like the left think you're a Nazi and the right think you're a bleeding heart liberal.
Well, and people don't get who you are because they're much more comfortable with somebody who ticks off every box on the left or every box on the right, and they're quite confused if you say, for instance, the EU seems to be doing. I voted to remain, but the EU seems to be doing quite a poor job at rolling out the vaccine, and we seem to be doing better having unplugged ourselves from the EU. So I don't mind talking about that because I think it's a really interesting fact, and but how relevant it is, I don't know.
Does it help people learn about purpose or embodiment? Like the Brexit one's a good example because it's kind of like it can get very aggressive very quickly. And I go, well, also like there's a humility in saying, you know what, I'm not really an expert on Brexit. I haven't really looked into it that much. So maybe I don't want to shoot my mouth off and alienate half my audience, especially given the fact that I haven't researched this, to some much depth. I researched it enough to think my vote was informed, but that was about it. Whereas embodiment, I've spent my life devoted to. So it's like, maybe I can shoot my mouth off a bit more about that.
Yeah. I think generally though, I follow some people who've got some really strong brands. Helen Pritchard's quite amusing, who teaches LinkedIn stuff. And, she will drink wine throughout her live webinars every single time. And, does an impression of kind of somebody who really likes to drink a lot, but it's become a big part of her brand. She's even got branded wine of her name on it now. I know another guy, Dan Meredith, who does a lot of sex jokes, and actually kind of works for him. It's done in a very good-natured way. He has a lot of women following him. It's never sexist, but he makes references to being single and sex and all sorts of stuff.
You can get away with a lot once you have a tribe of people who are sincere in how good natured, you're sincere and good natured, and they see that. And
I think that helps. Yeah, if you've got a bitterness inside you, I mean, everything I do, I hope is coming from goodwill. And so I share a lot of memes on Facebook, which is where I primarily hang out, my personal profile. And I like to go sort of somewhere down the line of being kind of entertaining and occasionally shocking. But to a point where you can believe I've got goodwill and I'm kind of laughing.
And that is a key question. Is like, there's this wonderful book on marketing called Trust Agents I'm reading now, which is pretty good. And how much trust do you have with a particular audience? Oh, John, you're frozen. Maybe it's my end. Hello. Hi. Hey, John, how's that? I moved. This looks like we had an internet outage. Okay, so editor, take that last part out. Okay, John, so let's get practical again. Someone's launching a course. Maybe they're thinking, you know what, I'm going to do an online course. There's a lot of lockdowns happening around the world. Where do they start with that? How do they make their online course a success?
Yeah, there's a lot of people raving about courses because they are a great thing to do. But they're the latest promise internet marketers are making that are going to make you a millionaire and it will all be very easy. If people are just starting out, if they're in the really early stages, I recommend they actually work one-to-one with people first, because it's a lot easier, unless you've got a big following. It's best to go to particularly passive courses. You only want to do those once you've got a significant following, because you've got to get a whole bunch of people to buy it in order for you to make any money. And you've really got to kind of run a launch process around that, where there is a fixed purchase window, because that tends to get the best results. That only works if you've got a big enough list or a big enough social following. So if you're just starting out, do stuff one-to-one, really get the feel of who you want to work with, what your methodology is, what your approach is. Then if you're going to do a course, I recommend people normally run it as a live.
Actually, can I just jump in a minute there, John? Because I think something that's worth saying here, that a lot of people are doing courses before they get good. So I was talking to Irene Lyon about this, who does great online courses and has really marketed herself very well. She's a good example of good marketing. But she did like 10, 15 years of one-to-one trauma therapy practice first. And yeah, she just got really, really good at it. She knew the subject inside out. And I think with one-on-one, you get that feedback as to what's working and what isn't. And then, I've done a lot of one-on-one embodiment coaching. And then when I teach a group, I can be pretty sure how something is landing. And I can be pretty sure that there's a certain section that will land differently and another section differently. And unless you've really sort of put the work in one-to-one, I think that isn't necessarily the case that you're learning in that same way with a group. Do you know what I mean?
I agree. My second book was kind of all about that feedback loop, and you get it really intimately one-to-one. And so you work with people a few times just to get the feel of it, and you'll start to understand what people really value, what they like, anything you shouldn't be doing that doesn't really work with people, and so on. And the hardest thing to do is to take that and package it into a course that people do completely on their own. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of people start, because they go, oh, this is going to be my big money earner. And then they spend all the time sitting there mapping out their course, which people are going to do on their own. And it's a little bit like sitting down and writing a non-fiction book from start to finish without talking to anybody. That also routinely ends in disaster. It's much better if you write a book out of all the content you've been sharing with people and the themes you've been exploring and people have been responding to. And then you go, okay, there is a book here. And then you write the book. So it's a similar kind of thing. And what I recommend is when you do move to doing a group course, that you run it live for similar kind of reasons. So I would run it on Facebook, keep it really low tech, get the content together in a way where you can put it out there as a rough first version. Maybe you deliver the content live, so that as you're doing it on Zoom or Facebook Live or something, you can see people commenting and go, wait, I don't understand that. And if everyone starts going, wait, you've lost me, then you know you need to put in some more detail.
Right, I missed a bit. I missed the step, or what I thought was obvious wasn't obvious, or people don't get what that word means, or I'm making an assumption. You are getting that nice loop, aren't you? And just emotionally as well, seeing what really lands with people. Like, oh, that's a good bit. I want to do that again. I'll stress that bit next time.
And the other thing is, it's actually one of the hardest things to sell is a passive course. So a course where someone buys it and just studies it at home and that's it. Because now you've got to convince people that this course is going to solve their problem, not you. Because it's one thing to say, like, here I am. And people, when they're buying into a one-to-one experience or even a group experience with you live, then they'll assume that, like, well, if nothing else, I can always ask Mark or John what's going on and ask them for my particular situation what to do, and I'll get an answer straight away. So it's a much easier barrier of trust to get over that it's worth spending the money on. It's much harder to do that passive course version. So of course you can do those things, and once you've got a good following and you're really clear how things work, you can do courses that people can purchase and use on their own, and you can run ads to them and all those kind of things.
I mean, the same thing with niching as well with courses, right? Like, is there a problem that's being solved, right? Like, we were doing this ethical marketing course. It's like, okay, people want to do marketing in an ethical way. It's very clear what it does, who it's for, right? It's like, rather than just like well-being course or like I see a lot of stuff from coaches that's like transform your life. And I'm like, well, from what to where? For who am I kind of go, why would I want to transform my life? Who are you? Who am I? What? It doesn't really make sense. It's not sort of specific enough.
Yeah, no, that stuff really is terrible. And I take people through a multi-step process where it starts with a problem that people recognize that they have a problem they need to do something about. If they don't recognize they have a problem, it's really, really difficult to sell to them. You'd have to spend money educating them to the point where they go, oh boy, I ought to do something about it. Now, it's hard enough to get people to buy something when they already know that they want it. Getting people to buy something when they didn't even know they wanted it is much harder. So certainly if you're a beginning entrepreneur, I wouldn't recommend doing that. You want to find where people have a problem and address that directly. And you want a problem. A problem is a situation people are in that they have a negative feeling about. I get really specific about this. So a problem is not, I want to lose weight. That's a kind of vague wish. Yes, that is that is broadly speaking something people want to do, and you can sell them. But the more specific you can be about what their life is like before this problem is solved, the more powerful your marketing will become, the better your copy will become, the better your social media posts will become. So if you can say, this person wants to lose weight, for instance, but diets don't work for them and they can't do that restriction thing, then, and you have a solution that addresses that, which is, healthy eating for life or whatever it might be, then you can describe what it's like to have tried dieting again and again, for it to have failed, to feel, dissatisfied with your weight, to be concerned about your long-term health, to look in the mirror and say, like, I don't really like where I've got to with my body. And if you can describe those things, it's really magnetic. So the better you can describe their life as it is right now, the more magnetic your marketing is going to be. Whereas coaches, particularly, those relentlessly positive people, fortunately, I'm not burdened by that. I'm a miserable brummie, so I find this very easy.
A brummie, someone from Birmingham, by the way, people.
Yeah.
So describing their problem, how their life sucks, and then describing what life might be like differently.
Exactly. So there's a kind of there's a before and an after you need to get clear about, and the after needs to be still fairly specific, like everything's going to be wonderful and the birds will sing just for you and you'll be in love and be a stone lighter and be 10 points higher in IQ. It's got to be something specific, like by the time you finish, you'll have this, this, and this. You'll have a bunch of tools. You'll feel like this. You'll know this, that kind of stuff.
It's a good example of this recently. We put an email out about ethical marketing thing we're doing, and I'd amended the copywriter's work, and I'd say, it needs to be more negative. It needs to say, you are horrible at marketing, you hate marketing, and you don't do any. You're rubbish at it, and you don't do any. And that sucks because you're broke. And he was like, well, you can't be negative. You must be positive. I'm like, no. First, we name the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is you're rubbish at it, and you're not doing any because you hate it. And we got a lot of feedback from people saying, it was so good that someone was just upfront about that. You just named it. They're like, hands up, that's me. What do I do about it? And we're like, okay, we got a course. Have a look at this,
And it's not actually being negative. It's being empathic. So it's actually saying, I've got empathy for where you are and I get it. And I know how miserable it is. And I want to do something about it. And this is what life is like for you right now. And it sucks. And that's people want to be seen. It's an incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah. And especially if you can see they get it. Like, I can't do this for everything. I'm trying to understand like parents, and I'm like, I'm doing my best to say, hey, when you're stressed, when your kids are screaming, but I'm sure if I was, a dad, I'd be able to say, when, and I give a much more specific example of, when you're waiting outside the school gates and it's raining, like something that I haven't really got my head around because I'm not able to make that leap too much, and I think this is why we can sell best to people who, I remember what it was like to suck at marketing, right? It wasn't that long ago. It was just sort of 5-10 years. Like I remember what it was like 15 years ago to be lost without life purpose and to feel aimless, So it's like, I can really, like, from the heart empathize with that, and I can write something which resonates with people, and not like as a trick, but just going, okay, I remember the suck of that,
Yeah, often your best client is you 5-10 years ago or 2 years ago.
I heard that one. I like that one.
Whatever it might be.
Listen, John, I've got a bit of a practical problem here I need to solve in Mexico, so we're gonna have to end a little bit early. I'll tell you the details privately. It's quite funny, but it's not one for the internet. But so is anything we sort of haven't covered that you can kind of quickly go, yeah, that's super useful. I really wanted to say that. I mean, obviously we'll tell people where to find the book kind of thing, but anything else?
I think one thing I'd say is notice when it's working, because this again is an embodiment issue, right? And some people, they hit on something that's really got traction and people are responding and they go like, yeah, and then we just move on and they don't clock it. So when something starts working and you get a good response, if a social media post gets a good response, if the idea of a course or something you say or something you do with people, then note it and use it and use that to course correct where you're going.
Great. I like that, because it's not theoretical, is it? Like marketing is not something we have to do, and life purpose. It's not something we have to do once and fire and forget. It's something we
Yeah.
can continuously feel in the body. That's the internal feedback, and notice what happens in the world. You know, right down to the, like, do people like the post? Do people turn up to the workshop? But, you know, it can be that practical, can't it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
John, I really do need to go. We could geek about this for a long time. I've read the first iteration in your book, and that was great. I still refer back to it, so I'm sure the second one is even better. It's fuck work, let's play, right? F star star K work, let's play.
Yeah.
I see you've jumped on the swearing bandwagon there, John. I'm going to
absolutely cashing in with the F word, but also trying to make a stronger statement. And actually, we were going to call it this the first time around, but thought we wouldn't get away with it because the first version was 10 years ago.
No, I know it is authentic for you because I've talked to you in a pub, and it's, as you say, it's interesting. Like, I think marketing has got more authentic in those 10 years. I think people can give the titles they want to give to books now. You know, they can say the things they want to say, and that authenticity is now possible, which I think is exciting.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great time to be marketing yourself.
To be a human. Where do people find you online, John? Where do they kind of check out your stuff?
My company's called The Ideas Lab, and the website's theideaslab.org. You can find out about the book on there. There's actually a dedicated website, which is fworkletsplay.com. And you can find the link to Amazon, because it's a little difficult to find on Amazon, what with the asterisks in the name. And I have a free Facebook group also called Fuck Work Let's Play. And we talk about this kind of stuff all day, every day. So come and join me. I also run occasionally 5-day standout challenges. So you can always keep an eye out for one of those. Lots of good stuff we do. It's very cheap.
John, you're solid, man. You know what you're talking about. I've been in this area for a little while, and you've been in it longer. And, you know, I always find you're just solid. You know your stuff. So I encourage people to buy the book, to check out what you're doing. And just personally, it's nice to see you again.